In your role on the task force and in your role working with the vice president, did you witness political pressure on the CDC to change their scientific advice and their recommendations about COVID?
I saw a lot of political pressure and dynamics on the doctors on the task force firsthand. There was certainly a lot of internal pressure from various very senior political figures in the West Wing. I saw the doctors bullied at times. I saw them at times have to really stand their ground and fight. And sometimes when they did that, it meant that most of you probably didn't see them in the press briefing the next day because they had probably said something that was a little bit too forthcoming and very true, and it wasn't in line with their message. So when it came, to guidelines and documents that were incredibly critical to get out to the American people for, the agencies, the health agencies such as the CDC, my heart goes out to these doctors. My heart actually, I was very supportive of the doctors. I worked very closely with them. I know Dr. Redfield personally. I know that he is a man of faith. I have seen him struggle with this incredibly hard, challenging dynamic of how do you lead this pandemic response. You're the leader for an agency. You've got staff and scientists that are working so hard day and night while you're trying to kind of stand up to these difficult circumstances. And I certainly saw this happen repeatedly firsthand.
Who were the political figures in the White House who would put this kind of pressure on the doctors? I mean, I just think if I can't imagine being a scientist. I can't imagine being, like a person who worked as a staffer or a senior staffer in some sort of administration. I can't imagine the hubris it would take to tell the CDC or to tell Anthony Fauci, to tell NIAID or NIH or any of these agencies that their science had to be changed, their science had to be downplayed, or their recommendations had to be altered to fit political considerations. Who in the White House felt like they had the kind of gravitas, the kind of standing to pressure those doctors?
We are talking at the most senior levels of the echelon of the White House. And though I don't want to get into naming names flat out, but I will say that we are talking about people who make decisions for the president and the vice president on a daily basis at times and advise them very significantly. And there were other entities within and components within the White House, such as OMB and the Regulatory Affairs Office internally, who were also involved in some of these, coordination on documents and things that would honestly end up with watered down guidances, things that the scientists, probably didn't not agree with. I mean, they were not as strongly worded or not as specific because they were trying to ensure that whatever message was coming out of the White House that was either for a voting bloc or some other concern about we're in a hurry to open up the country because we're in denial about what's really happening around us and what the president is saying. And, we got to fit it to his message. That was the goal of it. From what I could see, that's my opinion, but I saw it firsthand.
And on that point, in terms of what you saw firsthand, we recently reported that there was pressure put on the CDC to specifically water down their recommendations to meatpacking plants in terms of how to keep workers safe in meatpacking plants when they were emerging as some of the biggest outbreaks in the country. Thousands, ultimately tens of thousands of people got COVID at those workplaces. We reported just a few days ago that CDC scientists in the field in South Dakota were actually called and told they had to rescind their report and reissue it without any of the language that would have actually told the meatpacking companies what they needed to do to keep their workers safe. That happened in April, which is when you were on the task force. And that's when the task force meeting every day. It was a really intense time. Did you see any of that, or could you shed any light on that for us?
I did see this, and this was one of many instances where I saw this sort of interaction and back and forth within the task force meeting, and then we would leave the task force meeting and there would be other entities at play externally where there'd be a policy decided upon and that would suddenly change later. In terms of the meatpacking guidance, I mean, I remember this specific incident because I do know that there was discussion about whether, CDC, they're not a regulatory agency. Was this a recommendation? There were conversations about should CDC really be having this strong language there. But the truth is, CDC has these incredibly knowledgeable scientific experts that are, they deploy to outbreaks. They deploy to these plants, these meatpacking facilities, and they do this in order to respond to something and contain it. And if they're writing a report and giving these types of recommendations, I can't speak to the regulatory authority of the agency, but I can speak to the fact that those are probably strong guidelines that these factories and these facilities really need to adhere to. And, I have relatives that have actually worked in some of these facilities, and to watch these kinds of guidances be shifted in such a way was mortifying to me.